off the other two, but doesn't need the other two. The other two stand alone. And I'll ask what I'll do, ask too, is for Kelly to, we'll mute you all right now, because I can hear some keyboards here and there, but we'll ask you, we'll mute each of you. And if you want, you can send a text. You can send an IM, a chat at any time. And we've been doing that over the last few, is incorporating people's questions, thoughts, observations, and that as we've gone along. And I'm also, during this one, I'm going to ask you for a lot of your real-world examples as we go along. So feel free to use the chat. And even if you want to say, with the chat, if you say, hey, can I use the microphone? No problem. We can unmute you. And matter of fact, I think you might even be able to as well. So for that matter, let's get started then. If we look at this idea of the third of three new rules of engagement. First one, learn to be present. Second, learn to ask. Third one, learn to follow. There we go. My name's Don Brown. That gives you that kind of word cloud of my own bio. But basically, I'm somebody that I speak, I write, I coach, and I sell, essentially helping people with people. And the reason why this is entitled as it has been is my point of view is generally about some sort of simple truth. To me, something that's very basic, and it's unassailable in its truth, and also doing something different. If nothing else, I'd love that for the people that are live with us today or listening in a recording later on, I'm in the business at doing something different. I'd like to see you do something different. It's the only way we're going to get a different result is if I do something different, if I change something up. Now, I'll tell you what's interesting, too, it came up in the last couple of sessions, is that there's so much change going on in most of our organizations that ends up, the change that's there ends up changing us, forcing us to do something different. And I'm in the business of let's do something proactively. Let's decide what to change and what to do differently. So the simple truth that we've been dealing with in this session is one of what we call new rules of engagement. Now really, this idea of new rules of engagement, with with the business conditions or the organizational conditions of the day, it has many times dictated a different approach, a different rule of engagement in terms of how we interact and how we engage the people that we count on for results. You know, if you really go back, there was probably three, we always like to look at it as three different phases, one of them being kind of a trait phase, that everybody was always trying to understand what kind of traits, what kind of person makes an effective leader. Okay, that's one approach, and it doesn't mean that trait phase or that trait approach went away. It didn't. It in terms of trying to understand what kind of person it makes for a successful leader, follower, seller, servicer, engineer, whatever role you're looking for, it's still a very strong approach or a very strong paradigm, particularly in hiring and selection. But there came a time that the studies that were done to try and replicate and try and actually identify who's the best kind of person to be a leader, particularly, what makes the best leader, the research said, you know what, there isn't one. There isn't any single kind of person that is going to make the most effective leader. So a lot of the studies then shifted in actually the 1950s into look into what kind of behaviors will result in effective leadership. You know, if we can't identify what kind of person, then let's look at what do they do, what do effective leaders do, and if we can just replicate that, people will be effective, right? You know, you still see there's nothing wrong with it, but there's, you know, you look at it and you say, you know, well, if you just engage in behaviors A, B, and C, and what the research found then was that, you know what, you can't identify the all-purpose leadership style. You can't identify the all-purpose leadership approach. And that's fine. Well, and that still stayed with us because there's nothing wrong with teaching somebody, especially newer to the game, teaching someone about the basics or about what are the 3 to 5 or 5 plus or minus 2 things that an effective leader does, because then, you know, maybe you can give somebody a leg up if they can learn from someone else. But then what was the approach of the day was what the rule of engagement was to, let's do something situational. Because if we can't decide what kind of person, and if we can't decide what kind of behavior makes for effective leadership, well, then let's give people diagnostic models. So all of these have built in their day to what we look at today in terms of new rules of engagement. And if you consider what the rules of engagement are today that we've said the new rules are, it's 21st century leadership is what it comes down to. And it really is, we've said that the new rules are learn to be. In other words, because of today's, we still want to understand what kind of person generally what kind of traits are gonna fit the role. We also want to understand what are the normative behaviors that says, these are the things you have to do. We still want to do that. We still want, matter of fact, we're going to give you a situational model today. But we're doing it within the confines or within the context of new rules of engagement being, learn to be present. This is the 21st century. We can hardly pay attention for more than about 20 seconds anymore. So we've also said that you got to learn to ask. The paradigm of, at one time, a supervisor or a leader was seen as a cop, as a policing function. And then it was almost the leader as super performer. And then it came to be known that, the super performer and the super coach, that I've got all the answers and I'll teach you, don't worry about it. Well, those paradigms are disappearing. Not only do we need to learn to be, we need to learn to ask, but we also need to learn to follow a protocol. And that's what we're going to give you today is a protocol for effective leadership. A protocol for effective leadership. And that bullseye target that you're seeing out there is the model that came out of the research that gives us that. And let me hit a little bit up front. A protocol says it's a code of behavior or correct conduct or action. So we used the example. I knew someone quite well that suffered from leukemia. And they used to have the thing where the word first meant something to me is they used to have what was called a neutropenic protocol that said, when you come into contact with somebody with a compromised immune system, you need to glove and to scrub and glove and gown and mask. There's a certain protocol you go through before you engage in contact with this person. That's the neutropenic protocol for people with compromised immune systems like there is with leukemia. Well, you know what? We need that kind of code of behavior or correct conduct within a leadership function as well. Give us something that says, for the 21st century, not something that was for the 1940s or the 1950s or 80s but something for 2017 that says, give me a code of behavior if you can just help me with that. And we are building upon the trait-based, we've been building upon some of the normative behaviorally based, and we've also pulled upon the situational paradigm in terms of giving people a diagnostic tool. So that's what this protocol is and what we mean by it. And it's kind of the way it falls out. This protocol, this code of behavior or correct conduct, it comes out of that same global research that we've talked about in the last two webinars. It's not about the state of the relationship or the state of the project. It's the state of the moment leading today. And in doing that and talking, we said learn to ask, and we told you about what we asked and where we got 6,000 answers from. We gave you those, and there was a triad of needs and wants expressed. We asked those people, hey, if you could tell your boss just one thing, and we said if you could tell them, if you could give them one thing to start doing, one thing to stop doing, one thing to continue doing, what would that be? And what it came back with is communication, feedback, and autonomy. We talked about that. We talked about it when we were finishing up last Wednesday. Well, today what we want to do is dive into that. So how do I use that? If I have 6,000 people telling me from around the world that, number one, we want communication. I want to hear about it from you. I want feedback. I want to know how I'm doing, performance feedback, and I want that feedback from you, the leader. And then finally, I want autonomy. I want to be left alone. I didn't start this out to be a perennial apprentice. I did not start this out to have somebody, and I'll give you the probably the largest complaint in all that research had to do, we mentioned last week, had to do with micromanaging. So even though it's secondary and tertiary in terms of autonomy and feedback, those are very strongly felt needs. The first one is for communication. I want to know what's going on. Give me context. Give me big picture. Give me some of the reasons why. Second, I want to know how I'm doing on any given day. I want to feel I'm contributing. You know, communication a lot of times is simply about meaning. Feedback is about contribution. And the third one is autonomy. It's about freedom. It's about self-actualizing. So these are the three that we heard. This is the model that you're seeing here. So what I want to do is build it for you and build it with your help. Get some of your input, some of your situations, and some of your ideas in that. We've got some more that have joined us, and it'll be a nice way for us to have that discussion. So let's look at the human side of enterprise then. Let's look at this idea of the human side enterprise about leading. And if you do understand it, there's really two sides to the human side of what we do. And by that I mean there's a functional side. We have to have functional mastery. If you're in healthcare, you have to have a certain level of clinical mastery and experience. If you're in manufacturing, if you're in engineering, there's certain functional givens that are just the ante to the game. I'm working with someone that right now that is very deep in quality. Well, they have to understand a lot of the quality precepts. They have to understand a lot and have applied a lot of the quality processes. But every leader shares these two factors on the human side. The need to calibrate need. In other words, the dynamic of I have to calibrate. I have to understand. Calibrate simply means to put a number to put a metric, to put a measure, to measure need. So my first responsibility is to measure or understand what's needed in any given moment. And then the second one is for, if you think about it, my job is to create movement. Calibrate need, create some movement. That's what my role is. And if you think about any leading role, if you think about the central leadership role is that of parenting. You know, then you can take it to tribes and societies and organizations, but the central leading role is parenting. And our whole lives as parents is to understand need. What do they need from me right now? And create movement. Create movement towards what, you say? Well, I mean, think about it. Our whole lives are all about trying to understand what do they need and create movement. As first, we just want them to sleep through the night. Then we'd like to get them out of diapers. We'd like to get them in school half a day, in school a whole day. We want them to where we don't have to drive them everywhere they go, that they have mobility and can transport themselves. And then we want them to be able to support themselves. So it's always moving towards autonomy. It's always moving. You know, as sad as it is, and in my case, I've got 3 daughters, and they're all, you know, the youngest is 20, but will be 24 next month. So when you look at that, there is a certain, because my role as leader, as father, so to speak, in that is to create that movement to the point where what? They live somewhere else. I don't see them as much. They don't need me as much. And yes, then we take on a new role. We take on a new relationship, that of two adults. We take on a peer for collegial relationship. Yes, I'm always going to be older. But what happens is I'd like to move that paradigm into leadership, into understanding. You know what? My role is to calibrate and understand need, put a number to need, so to speak, and then to create some movement. Because you know what? I don't motivate others. They bring their own motivation. Motivation is intrinsic, but I can create movement with consequences. I can create movement in others. And so if you look at the human side of enterprise, yeah, there's a functional side of enterprise that I need to understand. You know, there's Terry is in academia. Someone else is in oh, I believe it was Napa in county government. Someone else is um, heck, auto parts. There's a functional side to every one of our jobs. And the individual in auto parts doesn't necessarily understand the functional side of county government. County government might not understand the functional side of large system UC university environment. But what we all have in common is this human side of enterprise, which simply is calibrate, need, create movement. Because I'll tell you what, I'm responsible for two things. I'm responsible for my people getting their work done, and I'm responsible for them feeling good about it. You know, I mean, that they get their work done and that they feel good about it. I mean, the whole idea of calibrating need is simply understanding performance and happiness. Are they performing and are they happy? To what level are they performing? To what level are they happy? And some people will say, you know, that I'm not responsible for it. And I agree that we all bring our own happiness to the job. But happiness impacts, that contentment impacts performance. These two, performance and happiness, are interactive. The happier I am, the better I perform. Many times, the better I perform, the happier I am. So it's not one without the other. And my job as a leader is I need them to perform because, you know, we are an enterprise that carries out certain functions, whether it's for profit or for education or for governance. We are in business, so to speak. We exist for a purpose. The other side is the idea of how happy they are is that, you know what? We talked about, I think on the first day, about return on leadership. The difference between somebody who is happy, someone who is motivated and committed, will give you 80% of their total capability, and they can sustain it. Someone who is not happy or motivated can get away with 30 or 40% without getting fired. The happiness side is pretty important too. So as we look at this, what I want to do is let's give you a way then, if we can understand how do we calibrate need. If I'm saying that the first job is to calibrate need, and we'll talk about how we create movement later, but let's just calibrate need right now, just on these two variables of performance and happiness. First one then, let's give you a way to look at it. Calibration level 1, or what we would call a C1, is somebody, an individual that in this moment is not performing to standard, and they're either uneasy or unhappy. It's what we call a C1. And I'd like you to chat, hit your chat or text it in. If you think somebody at a C1 level that is not performing and uneasy or unhappy in your environment, what does that look like? In the UC environment, in auto parts, in whatever world you happen to reside in, just chat an example or two of, you know what, somebody that's a C1, they're not doing it and they're not happy either, or they're uneasy. Tell me what it is, because I'll give you the basics. I mean, a lot of times you can have someone that might be, a lot of times this is somebody that's newer to the task, and they know what's going on. They do know how much they don't know. Somebody that is very self-aware. I've seen people that are newer to the job, and I work with new employee orientation a lot, where we get them in, they get tracked onto what their learning curve will be on the functional side, and we also spend a lot of time with them on the human side because they get paid to do that. But, you know, I've got a couple examples here. One that says, you know what, somebody, if they're at level C1, they could be confused. You know, they're not sure how to do the task. They're not sure how to do what you need of them. And a lot of times too, there's no that says maybe they didn't get the proper instruction. You know, we get a lot of people out there that sometimes as leaders we get somebody that comes in, and I don't give them the proper guidance. I don't teach them. Well, then they end up being uneasy. They end up being unhappy because they know they're failing. They know they're not performing. And we got another one that says, you know what, somebody was hired but they weren't given the attention they need at the right time. They're hired but not onboarded. I love that term. Thank you. Yeah, that somebody comes in, they're hired, but they aren't onboarded. And the ones that really do it, you know, I know onboarding processes that last a year. I know onboarding processes that last, you know, the first day or the first week. And sometimes that happens. You've got somebody, and it's not good or bad. What we're going to be getting to in the create movement side of this is, we'll get in later to, all right, what do I do about it? But right now, I just want to understand the moment. I've got another one in here too that somebody says, you know what? Somebody could be at calibration level 1 or a C1 because they've been given a task they don't want to do. It's been dumped on them. Yeah, not necessarily uneasy. Now you got not performing and unhappy. So you've got these different scenarios that can come into play. But all I want to do is I'm trying to understand, are they performing? Is their performance to standard or better at a consistent rate? And are they happy or not? You know, most of us, I got to say, most of us know when somebody's happy. We know when there is, particularly what it is we know when there's tension. We know when there's an absence of tension. I would use that as your kind of your yardstick. Are they tense or not? Because tension itself, what happens is, and I don't care what the endeavor it is, it might be professional, it might be personal. Tension is the first enemy of performance. Tension is the first enemy of performance. So we've got this C1, and that's all we're trying to do is say, you know, we've got no performance and we got tension. We've got performance substandard and we've got tension. And what happens here is we've got this idea of, all right, if we've got someone who is at level C1, not performing and uneasy or unhappy, then communication, go back to what I said is the triad, communication, feedback, autonomy. When you've got somebody who is full of tension, that they are unhappy or uneasy and they're not performing, communication is the answer. And from a leader's perspective, how I create movement with that C1 is through two things. One, understanding my purpose, understanding the communications purpose, understanding my style and their style. Probably the two variables that are the strongest here. And if you got questions as we go, this is what came out of our study with them. That said, what they're looking for is they first want to understand what we need to understand as a leader for creating some movement with those individuals, is that we need to understand their purpose and communicate that purpose. And it might be simply that I want to relate with this individual. It might be I want to try and influence them in a way, or it might be I'm simply going to inform and instruct. But I want to understand my purpose going in. So when I think about somebody at a lower level of calibration, they're not performing, they're not comfortable or happy just yet, then what I want to do is I want to understand my purpose, and I also want to understand style. What is my approach to problems, people, and pace? What is their approach? In other words, if you think my approach to problems is I'm going to solve it, I may be wrong, but I'm certain. And yet the other person is somebody, their approach to problems is they want to take in data. They want to consider alternatives. They want to take their time with it. Then I better think about how am I going to adapt and meet that need, their need. If I'm the in terms of my approach to people as a leader, if I am the extrovert, the intense extrovert, and they're a strong introvert, then what is it I've got to do? I got to slow down. I have to allow time. I have to allow alternatives and options and considerations. Same thing with pace. If I'm the one that I need it now, well, then I better learn to breathe before I speak. So what I'm doing here is simply letting you know, and you gave some really good examples of people at a C1 calibration level, and their highest level of need from you at that point is communication. And it may just be they need you to relate a little bit because they're feeling insecure, or they're feeling a little bit left out, or they feel like, I'm failing and I don't like this. They just simply need someone to relate. They may need somebody to actually provide accountability and influence them a bit, move them along the equation. And some of them just want to just tell me what to do. Don't worry about anything else. Just tell me what to do right now. And then we look at what kind of style of communication is most effective for them. So what we're doing is we're taking the idea of how do we calibrate need and how do we create movement. First level, it's understanding that you got somebody who isn't doing it and they aren't happy. Communication is the answer. The second is calibration level 2 is they aren't doing it yet, but they're eager. In other words, there isn't that kind of tension that freezes us. There isn't the tension that causes us to knot up. We've got somebody they're eager, they're happy, they're relaxed. It's an absence of tension. Calibration level 2. Go ahead and put your notes in terms of when you think of a C2. I'll tell you, it's somebody that they're eager to learn. Some people, I'll even tell you, there are some people that at a C2 level they're not performing, they're eager to do it. They're actually people that enjoy the rush of what I call the rush of readiness. They enjoy learning new things. That to me is a typical C2 response, is somebody that enjoys new stuff. There are some that's the exact opposite, but tell me in your world. Tell me in aerospace. Tell me in the business of keeping planes in the sky, because I know one of you, that's what you do and have done. When you got somebody that they're not doing it, but they're eager, tell me what goes on. I'm speaking to Laura specifically. Or where you're at, Bruce. Yeah, give me some examples here, or Terry, or Katie, or Nancy even. Yeah, you've got some that, I've got one here that actually somebody brought up the example of somebody that kind of, the term I use is ignorance on fire sometimes, that they aren't aware of some of the consequences or some of the complexities involved. I even had one person one time that gave me that kind of said to me, and this is a verbatim quote, said, preparation's overrated, let's get to work. And they were, at that time, they were eager, they weren't performing. And I've got one here that says, you know what, we hire the C2, we hire based on recognition of basic skills and attitude, but we don't invest in training them sometimes, or we don't appreciate the time it does take to train, and we're too slow to do it. I'll bet you, I'll add into that too, the idea, if I can add on that, is that idea of we don't appreciate the actual learning curve involved. We got people, they're not performing, they're eager, they're relaxed, and we just haven't, the fault is not in their commitment or their engagement. The lack lies within just the skills acquisition. And a lot of times it's us that does it. Yeah. Oh, and one of you just also noted that, hey, I've been this person. Said, I've been the person on the job that had been on it for a while and wants to do something and do something different, show my worth. So heck yeah, give me the thing I don't know. I'll take it. I may fail, but I'll take it. I'm happy to. Someone else with the that shows just the lack of patience. Just get it done. And a lot of times you can take people that are at calibration level C2, and if we don't give them the skills, because there is no, we aren't addressing any lack of engagement. We aren't addressing any dissonance of engagement. We're just, in this case, it's just how do we address performance needs, and what it comes down to is you've got, in creating movement, it's feedback. Whereas before, when you're addressing the needs of the dissonance, of the tension, communication is the need. When you're addressing performance specifically too, because I'll give you, for that C1, they aren't ready for performance feedback yet. They're still in their own head. But you have somebody at calibration level C2, they're eager, they're ready for the feedback. And for me, it comes down to either process or praise. When I'm thinking of, all right, I've got somebody at this level, I've got this level here that says, you know what, they're not performing, but they're eager, then feedback is what they're craving. They want to know how I'm doing. They want to, it's tell me about process. And I'll give you two very easy, what we pulled out of this, and it was kind of epiphanous for me, pulling it out of the surveys we had done with all those answers, is that, you know, everybody here knows about quality, quantity, and time. But what we don't do enough a lot of times is when we give performance feedback is we don't give them specifics of quality, quantity, and time that they can shoot for and achieve. So that's the easy side. Everybody knows about SMART goals, and everybody knows about quality, quantity, time, that in terms of giving them process feedback. The other side, though, is the idea of praise. And I'm going to ask you to just think for a minute about what praise is made up of. Just think for a second, what the heck is praise made up of? It's so simple, but so powerful to me. I mean, it's when the simple becomes obvious, or when the obvious becomes apparent. Praise is simply about contribution, effort, and growth. It's not about, oh, you did a great job on that. Well, what does that mean? Contribution means, you know, if it weren't for you, we would have failed with this. Your contribution made it happen. Or effort is, hey, I appreciate you going the extra mile. I appreciate you going. Thank you, Bruce. What this does is makes it specific to their life. Growth is simply something that says, you know what, you've come a long way. Look how far you've come. And that's what people are looking from. They're looking for process, and they're looking for praise from you. When people say feedback, well, it can mean a lot of things. But what they really are looking for is absolutely specific to me. Give me process feedback that tells me how I'm doing in terms of the quality of my output, the quantity of it, the timing involved. I'd also like to know, tell me about, on the praise side, tell me about my contribution if it's significant. Recognize the fact that my effort goes above and beyond. Recognize, too, that, you know what, on that curve we talked about with Laura earlier, yeah, the specific details of, you know what, in what way am I growing, you know? Well, you know what, you've done it, you've taken over, you're talking to a salesperson, and sometimes there's a couple of sides to their job, and you can talk to them and you say, you know, saving a particular account is what kept your book of business alive and afloat. The contribution, the effort that you put in, going the extra mile for your customers, off hours, and then the growth that you've shown. You know, you're not just supporting current accounts. You're bringing in new stuff. You've become a rainmaker on a sales side. On an engineering side, you can do contribution in terms of quality. Contribution in terms of quantity. So, I mean, you can praise both sides. You can pull it from the process feedback that you're giving them to. So if you look at it, C1 is somebody that is, they're not performing and they're tense. C2, not performing, but they're pretty relaxed. There's an absence of dissonance, of tension. Feedback is what they want. And go to a calibration level 3. Now I've got somebody that's performing, but they're uneasy or unhappy. They're performing now. The performance is there. And I don't mean beginner's performance. I mean the performance is just fine. Now tell me about this. Tell me about your world for somebody that's performing, but they're uneasy or unhappy. I can give you from several worlds where people are hit. In other words, I'm hitting numbers. I'm hitting my numbers. But you know what? Either I feel underappreciated, or I might feel that I'm being taken advantage of, It might be that, you know what, you just keep piling on work, and yes, I'm still doing it. Bruce is saying here that, since it isn't, if you think about it, performance is the issue with that C2. The tension is the issue, the lack of engagement. The lack of engagement is the C1, what we're trying to treat. Lack of performance is what we're trying to treat with the 2. Now we're back to engagement again. Because performance is okay, and Bruce is saying, they're looking for a little bit of reassurance. Looking for a little bit of reassurance. You know what they're also looking for? You know what the answer is? Because you can have people that are, it's the first time they're doing a particular task. Now they got to do it themselves without the boss involved, without you involved in terms of providing that. They get to a point where, yeah, they're doing it, but they're feeling a little bit underappreciated. They're feeling a certain need for reassurance, or maybe they're just getting a little ticked off. Well, what the answer is, yes, we can have a C3 too, where we've rearranged the furniture and changed their job. Wow. And they go backwards. Matter of fact, a lot of times they go back and they aren't performing anymore. And like Laura was saying, it's a critical time for communication, because matter of fact, we've rearranged the furniture and created a C1. We expect their performance is going to be up, and all of a sudden it drops. Why? Because we changed the rules. Not only do we rearrange the furniture, Laura, we also we move the invisible electric fences. And they don't appreciate running into these high voltage invisible fences that are around the campus there. Mm-hmm. Well, really, what the way to create movement, we've said calibrate need, create movement. With a C3, we calibrate that they're performing just fine, but there's the engagement is the issue. Well, we create movement in this case with autonomy. It almost seems in this case, because I've got my performance, the road out here is autonomy. People are looking for communication when they aren't performing, and their engagement is variable. They're looking for feedback when the engagement's fine. I want to work on my skills. When I've got the performance down and I've just got a commitment, an engagement issue, then it's about autonomy. The answer from what we see and what they asked for when they said, here's what's going on, and here's what I would tell you, boss, and here's what I want you to do. When they were saying, I'm doing fine, but I'm feeling underappreciated, then what I want from you is to quit micromanaging me. Treat me, catch me doing something right. Treat me the way I'm looking for. And when we look at autonomy, the road to it is twofold. It's ownership and exit. Ownership, a transfer of ownership on their part, and that's and if you think about it, one of a cool, for me, a very good athletic analogy for this lies within track and field. You look at relay races. There is a path for the baton handoff, for the transfer of ownership, so to speak, for the end of me being the one that's really running the leg as this leader, and you picking up and you running from here on out. There's a set amount of space that we do it in. Matter of fact, if we start the transfer beforehand, or if it carries on after, we're disqualified with it. So as you look at it, you've got the two sides. One is the transfer of ownership. Ownership, and I mean that not just the responsibility, darn it, but the ownership of it. From me to them. And it's an agreement and an alignment of expectations around where that path of the handoff is. Where does it start? Where does it end? So as I look at how do I deal with somebody that's performing but there's unease, it's not communication at this point. Matter of fact, it's less of me that's going to be the answer. Why? Because they're performing. They don't need me to perform. And my job is done at that point. The exit strategy itself is looking specifics, like Bruce was saying earlier, at the data and delta. What is the data that it's going to take for somebody to be off and running on their own. First, we were talking about ownership, transfer of ownership, how we can. Now we're talking about the specifics, the data itself, the measurement that we're using for their performance, for them to own it, for them to take it. And the other side, the delta of what change is required and at what point, what is that target, at what point do they run off with it? At what point is it theirs and not mine anymore? And matter of fact, a lot of times when I've done some team coaching where I'll coach with a given executive or manager, and I'll ask them, given a particular responsibility, I'll first ask who owns it. And I'll even say, at what point does your authority end and theirs begin in reference to that? Talking to a leader and a follower now, a leader and a team member, to say, at what point does your authority end and theirs begin? Most of us as leaders, we're happy to give up responsibility, but it's harder for us to make sure, not because we don't want to, but a lot of times it's harder for us to let go of the authority there. That's what is my exit strategy? What is the ownership transfer? What is my exit strategy? That's what autonomy is about. And I'll give you one more level of calibration. First one is C1, not performing and uneasy. C2 is happy and still not performing, but happy. C3 is somebody that's performing, but there is that tension and dissonance. And now let me talk to you about C4. Somebody that is performing and happy. You know, we said that you got two sides to it. Calibrate need and create movement. If they're at C1, they need communication. They want communication. If they're at C2, they want and need feedback. If they're at C3, they want and need autonomy. That's the answer. Let me ask you, I'd like to see some answers from every one of you on, if you've got somebody that's calibrated at a C4, they're performing, they're happy, and their performance is great and consistent and above standard, and well, what do they need and want now? What is the calibrate the need here? And this is where a lot of times, you know, it's one thing to set a path to autonomy, but once it's reached, once that child has grown up, moved out, they're self-supporting, they're a happy, healthy, functioning adult that lives elsewhere. Now what do they need from me? I'm not seeing any answers yet, but this is one of the toughest ones. Listen and collaborate. One that Bruce says. Who drives it, Bruce? Continue to check in and listen. Yep. I love because that idea of collaborate, the idea of colleague, the idea of a partner, the idea of, if I look at it, it says the team member drives, not the leader. Absolutely, the team member drives it. When I think it is collaborative, it is collegial at this point. They need an adult relationship. That's what they're looking for. And you know what? You know what I'm going to say in terms of creating movement? One of the biggest things you can do is this idea of asking and asking permission. I'm of course a product of television growing up and movies and that, and I love the line in A Few Good Men with Jack Nicholson where he says, "You got to ask me nicely." When people get to a C4, they don't take any word but leader. They do not need a leader at this point. They do not need. I'm not creating movement at this point. Who's creating the movement? They are. Who's creating the movement? They are. So as I think of this, and you had checking in and listening and supporting and needed when asked for it. Available is another good term. And I'll tell you what, and we use this as our second Terry mentioned before about how this builds, and the second rule of engagement of learning to ask. This is really where it comes into play. Think about it. I've got somebody. Yes, let them come to you. Let them come to you. It's not a case of me going to them. And it's really about me asking them. How can I be a better manager? How can I support you better? If I want, because in many cases, they could still, if you think about it, they can still profit from your perspective, from your experience, in many cases, although there's a whole lot of things that our people do today that they're a hell of a lot better than we are at it. So they can't even, it's not necessarily that they would even profit from my perspective on it. But the biggest differentiator I see is asking if I might offer, at least for someone like me that is direct and verbal and extroverted. But simply when you've got somebody performing and happy, I'm out of the leadership business. And when you look at that bullseye is what I'm shooting for. That bullseye is the target. It is the bullseye. It is what I'm shooting for. And in many cases, as a leader, it's almost, I'll get some that'll say, well, what the heck's my job going to be? And my response is if you haven't thought about that too much, it's telling me you aren't creating much movement. As this wheel turns, as this wheel spins, really what I'm trying to do with different individuals is just calibrate need right now for what I'm dealing with them on in any given conversation, and then to create some movement. If they're at a C1 level, then communication is going to be the lever. It's going to be the catalyst for that movement. If it's C2, feedback is going to be that catalyst. C3, autonomy is going to be the catalyst that'll create movement. When I've got somebody that's performing as a C3, but they're uneasy, well, if I can ensure that pathway to autonomy, then I'm driving it. That's what creates that's the catalyst. And Bruce has a note that says, absolutely, if the C4 is given a new task, they could become a C3 or lower. Absolutely. It's about calibrating a moment. And where I'd go with this too, Bruce, is if you have, we're people of I know in healthcare these days there's a lot of talk about value streams. And I add to that, I said, well, think about value streams are made up of moments. Value streams are made up of moments. That's how we lead today. That's how we serve others. That's how we sell. That's how we grow, is in moments. And absolutely somebody that is, matter of fact, if there's somebody that's C4, they are often the ones that are C2 coming to me and saying, you know what, I could take care of that for you. Or it might be somebody I say, you know what, I've got something else that I'd like to free myself of and turn over to you. Well, they might come back as a C2. They might come back as a C1. Absolutely, Bruce, people roll around. I just want to get us to the point that says, you know what? C4 is that bullseye, and it's what I'm shooting for, and they don't need a leader at that point. I mean, think about it. Do your half of what we do as parents that drives our adult kids crazy is when we continue to play that critical parent role, and I'm as guilty as anybody else, when we continue to play that critical parent role in reference to a moment in which they're looking simply for an adult response. And these are in interaction management terms. These are in terms of I'm okay, you're okay, so to speak. We can play a parent role, we can play a child role, we can play an adult role. And maybe if I think of what creates movement, because we can all continue to move. What creates movement with a C4? How about just the word adult? Just the word adult. People don't need critical parent. telling us, oh, in no uncertain terms, what they ought to be doing and how they should be doing. People don't need nurturing parent even. They don't need somebody that said, oh, don't worry about it, I'll take care of it for you. They don't need somebody that's being either a curious or a petulant child. What they need, the catalyst there becomes the adult. And as as leaders, a lot of times what it's difficult for us to do is when we take on responsibility for someone else, for creating, for growing their competency, for growing and maintaining engagement. It's hard for us to let go of that. And you know what? The cool thing is, many times with that C4, in words of my buddy Marshall, all you have to do is nothing. All you have to do is let go of that. Thoughts, comments, or slander from some of you out there that are in looking at this idea of taking a 21st century approach to understanding the trait side of things in terms of different communication style, the behavioral norms of communication, feedback, autonomy, the situational nature of let me calibrate need first before I try to create movement. And the last one, and this is, I spent a long time working with Paul Hersey as his top affiliate, running his company. Spent a long time with him on it, and we used to talk about different things that somebody at a 4 level needs. When they're performing and they're relaxed and competent and confident and happy to do it and motivated and actualizing, they don't need a leader. Sometimes we just won't let it go. Terry also says, it really drives home the point of being present with your team and asking your team what they want and need. Absolutely, Terry, the idea of being present, the difference between now and 40 years ago or 30 years ago, for those of us that have enough gray hair to have been working and leading in that era, is we just don't have it. We're so distracted today that half the time we aren't paying attention what somebody does need from us. Absolutely. And the higher they roll in calibration, the more asking we should be doing. And Katie has here, about, thank you, that it's a good framework. A good framework, Katie, and also to me, just that idea of I'm looking at that red C4 performing and happy. That's my job on the human side of what I do. There's all kind of functional or clinical background and competency I need, but in terms of human competency, that's my target. In working with different, you'll see a chop on our last slide that deals with, my goal is always to help people with happiness. I want them I want for them abundance and contentment. And really that C4 is what we're shooting for in somebody else. We want abundance and contentment for them. And these couple of rules of engagement that we've been working with, this learn to be present, like Terry says, that's the foundation to it all. One of the key levers is learn to ask and get out of the simple ego drives that seem to push us. A lot of times ego is what gets us to this point, but empathy or asking is what gets us to the next. And then learning to follow a protocol, like you say, as Katie had said, having a framework in which I can approach the moments that I have in my value streams as a leader. Absolutely, having something that I can follow. And I'll even, before I turn it back to Terry here and let her provide any thoughts, or if any of you have comments or questions or that, there's a couple. The one thing I'm going to say, a lot of times, I'm a so what, now what kind of guy. Anybody that knows me knows that my response in looking at something is so what. Well, we've just been talking about it. The so what of learning to be present in a 21st century environment, that you're not going to succeed without it. Or in Katie's case, of having a context, a framework, a model to do that. But the now what question is, all right, what do I do now? We spent 3 hours together. You've also got an option where you can, you've looked at basically three lessons that we've dealt with, 3 concepts, 3 truths. Learn to be present, learn to ask, learn to follow. There's 25 more. people can do this in a self-study deployment too. The same as people have recordings to this ATD. They've got recordings to that. And the one thing that you do see here at the bottom, that's my personal chop. That's our philosophy, our chop here at donbrown.org. And it's all about, that is a chop for abundance and contentment. Somebody even, I was in I have one of those, that chop on a ring that I have, and someone had says, "Oh, I love your chop," and I said, "Yeah, you know, happiness," and they said, "And lucky too." I wish you that. I wish you the idea of, excuse me. I wish you that idea of abundance and contentment. That's what I hope for you. If there's thoughts or comments, and I would turn it over to Terry if you'd like. If there's something you'd like to say as we get ready to close here, Terry. I've left the group 15 minutes with which to either take a break before they go to their next moment in the value stream. What do you say, Terry?
Well, can you hear me? Because I've switched to my computer from the phone.
Yes, I can. Yeah.
Okay, good. I should say from the phone to my computer. Well, thank you, Don. I have to, again, thank you for your time over these last 3 weeks and for your insight and for your very good food for thought that you have provided us, which is appropriate since we did this over the lunch hour. You know, when you really think about what does this mean in my personal life and my professional life and how can I use all three of these elements together, you know, you really can think about how they fit, right? And how can I, as a leader, how do I use the protocol? But even as an individual, how might I use that in my own personal life? Or are there areas of my personal life where maybe I fit into one of those categories, 1, 2, 3, or 4? So thank you for sharing that. I'd be happy to hear from anybody on the call who'd like to make any comments before we close in terms of what maybe you've gotten out of it or how you could see this apply to you or your work.
And we still have 5 of that. So either way, it's such a the nice thing about things like this is it's such a busy world that to be able, like you say, to consume it at lunchtime and take it in, and then it's right back to work again. But if you can take the time to become what Warren Bennis used to call a first-class noticer, that's the whole idea of learning to be present, is become a first-class noticer of other people. The second one is just dial back the ego, learn to ask, and then maybe dial up the discipline and learn to follow a particular protocol. You bet. It's been very good, and I thank you for the opportunity. It's been fun.
You are more than welcome. And for those of you on the phone, if any of you are not familiar with ATD, the Golden Gate chapter, please feel free to reach out to me. You can reach me at president@tdgoldengate.org, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that you may have. And with that, I guess I'll be giving you back all the rest of your day.
Thank you. See you, Terry.
Okay, thank you. Bye.